Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. This time we're taking a closer look at elementary notions of Spiritism.
Oh, a classic.
It is from Allan Kardec's What is Spiritism?
Yeah.
So, lays it all out right there in the title, The Elementary Notions.
The foundation.
Exactly. And helping me sort through it all is, well, I'd say an expert on all things spirits and Spiritism.
Well, I don't know about all that, but I've been studying it for a while, so hopefully I can help.
Perfect. Let's dive in.
Forward.
So one of the things that struck me right off the bat is how Kardec starts off. He argues that just seeing a spooky event or two, isn't going to suddenly convince a skeptic.
Right, right. He says, witnessing some strange phenomena, it doesn't automatically equal belief.
It's almost like he's saying, okay, you can see something strange, but if you don't believe in the underlying concept, you're just going to explain it away.
Exactly. It's not the phenomena itself, he says. It's this deeper disbelief in the soul. Like, if you don't believe in a soul, why would you believe it can exist outside the body, right?
That makes sense. I never thought about it that way. It's like trying to convince someone about the internet if they don't even believe in electricity.
Yeah.
You got to start with the basics.
Exactly. And that's what this chapter tries to do. It lays the groundwork, encourages us to be open-minded, understand the principles before we judge.
Okay, fair enough. So let's talk about those principles then. I have to admit, I always pictured spirits as kind of these wispy, ghost-like figures. But that's not really what Kardec's describing here, is it?
No, not exactly. He's defining spirits more as the souls of beings who have lived, either here on Earth or on other worlds.
Okay.
And they've shed their physical bodies, but they exist in what he calls a perispirit.
It's perispirit, so not a ghost body.
Think of it as, well, it's not a physical body. It's more like a fluid, energetic body that connects the soul to the physical world. And it says humans are made up of 3 parts.
Okay.
The soul, which is, the intelligent part of us, the moral essence, the physical body, which obviously we all have, and then this perispirit. It's like the link between the two.
Oh, that's interesting. So it's like we're shedding the physical, but the soul wrapped in this perispirit. That's what carries on.
That's what he's saying. And it kind of leads to this fascinating view of the spirit world, which is not this empty void, but a bustling place filled with spirits at all different stages of development.
So it's like a giant cosmic cocktail party with souls from all over the place. But if there are all these spirits around, how do they actually, communicate with us? How does that work?
Well, he outlines a few different methods. Sometimes it's subtle, influencing thoughts, feelings. Other times it's more direct through our senses, like sight, sound. They can even communicate through, physical phenomena.
Are we talking like poltergeist activity, stuff flying off the shelves?
Not necessarily. He explains it's not like spirits are physically grabbing objects. Remember, they're in that perispirit form. They're interacting with the physical world using this kind of energetic force.
Okay, so less ghostly hands, more energy waves. But what about those rapping spirits you hear about? How do they get our attention? Is it the same thing?
He describes it as the spirits using their perispirit to kind of create vibrations, almost like an electrical impulse.
So they're knocking on the door of our reality, but not with a physical hand.
Right. And he says not everyone can hear these knocks.
That's where mediums come in, right?
Exactly. He describes mediums as these individuals who are particularly sensitive to these communications, like a bridge between the physical and spirit worlds.
So they're like the spiritual interpreters, translating those energy knocks into something we can understand.
You could say that. And he says there are all different kinds. Some communicate through writing, others through speaking, even some who can produce physical effects. It's a whole spectrum.
Like Spirit World Karaoke Night, get your singers, your dancers, your poets.
Yeah, something like that. But one important thing he emphasizes is that spirits, they don't communicate on demand. It's when they choose to, not when we want them to.
So no scheduling a chat with Grandma for next Tuesday.
Apparently not. But this brings up another point he makes, the potential downsides. He talks about the risk of obsession, where a spirit becomes overly attached to a person or a place.
Okay, now that does sound a little creepy. Tell me more about this obsession. What does that actually look like?
Well, he outlines these 3 degrees of obsession. It starts with simple influence, then it can escalate to fascination, and then it culminates in what used to be called possession, but is now termed subjugation.
Subjugation? That sounds intense, like the spirit is trying to take over.
It's the most extreme form, yes. But he also gives guidance on, how to recognize it, how to deal with it. So it's not all doom and gloom.
Well, that's good to know. Knowledge is power, right?
Yeah.
The more we understand about this, the better we can handle it responsibly.
Absolutely. And that kind of leads us to another interesting question he raises. Does the moral character of the medium matter?
Oh, good point. Is there like a, good spirit, bad spirit rating system based on the medium's personality?
Not quite. He says the ability to be a medium, it's not tied to morality. Anyone can have it. But good mediums, they tend to attract good spirits because they themselves are morally strong.
So it's not about being a saint, but just having a solid moral compass, like attracts, like even in the spirit world.
You got it. He emphasizes qualities like humility, discernment, a resistance to pride. Good mediums, they're not easily swayed or fooled.
Which brings up something I'm sure a lot of listeners are thinking. How do you tell the real deal from a fake? Aren't there a ton of, charlatans out there claiming to talk to spirits?
Oh, he definitely acknowledges that. He warns against charlatanism, people pretending for their own gain. But he also suggests that true communication, especially when it's conveying complex ideas or deep insights, that's much harder to fake.
Right, you can't really fake a conversation with someone's deceased grandmother sharing details no one else would know.
Right. So discernment is key. Don't just believe everything you see or hear. Question things. Think critically.
Good advice for life in general.
Right.
But even in, what we might consider genuine spirit communication, there are sometimes contradictions. If spirits are supposedly wiser, more knowledgeable, why wouldn't their messages be consistent?
That's such a good question. And he actually addresses that. He says spirits, just like us, they're on a journey of learning. They have opinions, but they don't always have it all figured out.
So even in the spirit world, you can't escape those know-it-alls who love to hear themselves talk.
Apparently not. He really emphasizes using our own judgment, even if it's coming from a spirit.
So critical thinking is key. Even when we're dealing with the spirit world, it's not about shutting down, but also not just accepting everything at face value. It's about finding that balance.
Exactly. And that balance is crucial because the purpose of all this, it goes way beyond, spooky thrills or satisfying our curiosity. There's a much deeper purpose.
Okay, I'm hooked. What is that deeper purpose?
He says spirits are trying to guide us, help us understand the nature of the soul, the reality of the spirit world, the consequences of our actions. It's all about growth, moral and spiritual growth, both individually and as a society.
So they're trying to help us evolve.
Yep.
Less about chit-chat, more about life lessons.
That's it. And he emphasizes, good spirits. They're drawn to individuals who are striving for improvement. They want to nurture us, not just entertain us.
That's a beautiful thought.
Yeah.
But if they're learning too, how can we be sure we're getting accurate guidance? What if they're giving advice based on their own limited experience?
He does acknowledge that. Spirits can have biases, limitations. They might mean well, but still get things wrong. Like taking advice from anyone, really. You consider the source.
Right.
You use your own judgment. You decide what resonates.
That makes sense. It's about taking responsibility for our own spiritual growth, not relying on spirits to tell us what to think.
Exactly. And that ties into one of the most profound ideas he explores in this chapter, this whole idea of moral responsibility.
Moral responsibility. Okay, I'm listening. What does that mean in the context of, spirit communication?
He suggests our thoughts, our intentions, even our actions, they have an impact on the spirit world. It's understanding that we're not just isolated individuals, but part of this larger spiritual community.
It's like those butterfly effect movies. Small actions having big consequences, but on a spiritual level.
Exactly. He encourages us to be mindful, not just for ourselves, but for the well-being of everyone.
Wow. So it's not just about me and my actions. It's about how I impact the whole web of existence, seen and unseen.
You got it. And that interconnectedness, it goes even deeper when you consider what he says about life after death.
Okay, now we're getting to the really big questions. What does he say about what happens after we die?
He presents the afterlife not as this static place, heaven or hell, but a continuation of our journey. We keep learning, growing.
So no harps and clouds or fire and brimstone, more like continuing education for the soul.
Something like that. And the quality of that experience, it's directly tied to the choices we make here and now.
So it's not about some external judgment. It's about the state of our own souls, what we've cultivated, what we bring with us.
That's it. He's saying if we cultivate kindness, compassion, integrity, in this life, we're naturally going to experience a more harmonious afterlife. Not as a reward, but just because that's the energy we've woven into our being.
That ties back to that moral responsibility we were talking about.
Exactly.
It's not about following rules to avoid punishment. It's about building a better self. a better soul.
Exactly. And that's what I find so empowering about it. It's not blind faith. It's about taking responsibility for our own growth.
This is a lot to take in. I feel like we've only scratched the surface here, but it's already given me so much to think about.
Me too. It's so dense, so many ideas, and we're just getting started. There's so much more to uncover. Welcome back to the deep dive. Glad to have you with us as we keep going deeper into these elementary notions of Spiritism. And before the break, you were saying how all this is making you rethink, life and death. That's pretty big stuff.
It really is.
Yeah.
And what we were talking about with spirits, being all around us, potentially communicating, it makes you wonder, how does all that work? How can something without a physical body interact with our world? It seems impossible.
Yeah, it's a great question, and Kardec gets into that. Remember the perispirit we talked about? It's not just like a ghostly shell. It's more like a fluid, energetic field, surrounding the soul.
Right, the link between the soul and the physical world.
Yeah.
But how does that explain things like, moving objects or those rapping sounds people hear?
Well, he says it's not that spirits are physically picking things up or knocking on walls. They're using their perispirit to interact with the energy of the physical world.
So it's less Casper grabbing a book, more like, I don't know, manipulating energy fields. It's hard to picture.
Think of a magnet. It can move a metal object without actually touching it, right? It's the magnetic field. Kardec suggests something similar is happening here.
Okay, that's a good analogy. So those rapping sounds, not a ghostly fist, more like a focused burst of energy creating a vibration, something we hear as sound?
That's the idea. And he's really saying these interactions, they're governed by natural laws, just like gravity or electricity, but laws we might not fully understand yet.
So could you replicate them then?
Yeah.
If they're natural laws, couldn't someone with the right knowledge, I don't know, a magician, create similar effects?
Well, that's where things get interesting. Kardec does acknowledge that some phenomena can be faked. He talks about charlatanism, people pretending for their own gain.
So how do you know what's real and what's a trick?
He says to pay attention to the content, True spirit communication often reveals insights, knowledge that couldn't have come from anywhere else.
So if my deceased great aunt starts spilling family secrets, that's a good sign.
Could be. But he emphasizes discernment, thinking critically, not just accepting everything at face value.
Good advice anytime, really. But even in, let's call it genuine spirit communication, there are often contradictions. If spirits are supposed to be wiser, more knowledgeable, why wouldn't their messages be clear, consistent?
Yeah, it's puzzling, right? And Kardec says, well, spirits, they're on a journey too, just like us. They might have strong opinions, but it doesn't mean they're always right.
So even in the spirit world, you can't escape those know-it-alls.
Seems that way. He really stresses using our own judgment, evaluating the information, even if it's coming from a spirit.
So it's not about blind acceptance. It's about being open, but also thinking critically, finding that balance.
Right, and that balance is so important because the purpose of all this, it goes way beyond, spooky stuff or satisfying our curiosity. It's deeper than that.
Okay, I'm on the edge of my seat here. What is that deeper purpose?
Kardec says, spirits are trying to guide us, help us understand, the nature of the soul, the reality of the spirit world, the consequences of our actions. It's about growth, moral and spiritual growth, individually and as a society.
So less about idle chit-chat, more about helping us evolve.
That's it. And he emphasizes good spirits, they're drawn to individuals who are striving for improvement. They want to nurture us, not just entertain us.
Now, that's beautiful. But if they're learning too, how can we be sure we're getting, accurate guidance? What if their advice is based on outdated beliefs?
He does acknowledge that. Spirits can have biases, limitations, like taking advice from anyone. Really, you have to consider the source.
Right.
Use your judgment, what resonates with you, what doesn't.
Makes sense. It's our responsibility, our spiritual growth, not relying on spirits to tell us what to think.
Exactly. And that ties into one of the biggest ideas he explores here, this idea of moral responsibility.
Moral responsibility, huh? So what does that mean, especially in the context of, spirit communication?
He says our thoughts, our intentions, our actions, they have an impact on the spirit world. We're not just isolated individuals, but part of this bigger spiritual community.
It's like, those butterfly effect movies? Mm-hmm. Small actions, big consequences, but on a spiritual level.
Great analogy. He encourages us to be mindful, not just for ourselves, but for the well-being of everyone, seen and unseen.
So it's not just about me and what I do, it's about how I impact this whole web of existence.
Wow. And that interconnectedness, it goes even deeper when we think about what he says about life after death.
Okay, lay it on me. What happens after we die, according to Kardec?
He says it's not some static place, heaven or hell. It's a continuation of our journey. We keep learning, growing, evolving.
So no harps and clouds or, fire and brimstone. More like continuing education, but for the soul.
You could put it that way. And the quality of that experience, well, he says it's directly connected to the choices we make here and now.
So it's not about external judgment. It's about the state of our own souls. What we cultivate, what we bring with us.
Exactly. He says, if we cultivate kindness, compassion, integrity in this life, we're naturally going to experience a more harmonious afterlife. Not as a reward, but just because that's the energy we've woven into our being.
Which brings us back to moral responsibility, right?
Wow.
It's not about following rules to avoid punishment. It's about building a better self, a better soul.
That's it. And that's what I find so empowering about it. It's not blind faith. It's about taking responsibility for our own growth, understanding how our actions ripple outwards.
This is a lot to absorb. I feel like we've only just begun to explore this chapter, but it's already given me so much to think about.
Me too. And you know what? We're just scratching the surface. There's even more to unpack.
Welcome back, everyone. We've been on quite a journey exploring these elementary notions of Spiritism, and I'm really starting to see things in a new light.
It's an eye-opener for sure.
It is. And right before the break, we were discussing how our actions affect not just us, but the whole spiritual community. It's kind of a lot to think about.
It is a big responsibility. And in this last section of the chapter, Kardec kind of brings it all together. He says that understanding Spiritism, well, it can have huge implications, not just for us as individuals, but for society as a whole.
Okay, now I'm really curious. What kind of societal impact are we talking about here?
He suggests that if Spiritism were widely accepted, it could lead to like a total shift in values. Instead of being driven by material gain, people would be motivated by this deeper understanding of their spiritual nature, and how we're all connected.
That's a big idea. It's like imagining a world where compassion and empathy are the driving forces, not competition and greed.
Exactly. He sees this world where people are driven by, doing good, contributing to the well-being of others, creating a more just and harmonious society.
It's almost utopian.
Right.
If everyone was living with that awareness, that connection, things would be so different.
It's a bold vision, for sure. And he even suggests this shift in consciousness could go beyond just individual behavior. It could impact everything, our institutions, our justice system, even how we understand science and reality.
Wow. So we're not just talking about people being nicer to each other. We're talking about like a whole new way of seeing the world and ourselves.
Right. It's expanding our perception, recognizing these unseen forces that shape our lives, embracing this interconnectedness of everything. It's a lot to take in.
It really is. This whole deep dive has really shaken things up for me. It makes you think about your life, your choices, the legacy you want to leave behind.
It's powerful stuff, and that's what's so great about it. Spiritism isn't just a bunch of beliefs or spooky stories. It's a call to action. Engage with the world, be more mindful, more compassionate.
It's about how we live right now, not just what happens after we die.
Exactly. It's about creating a better world in this life and the next. And that's what makes it so inspiring. It's hope, guidance.
Well, this has been incredible. It feels like we've only just begun to understand this chapter, but it's given me so much to consider.
Me too. And even though we've reached the end of our deep dive today, the exploration doesn't stop here. There's always more to learn, more to experience.
It's really just the beginning, isn't it?
It is. And I encourage everyone listening, keep exploring, keep asking questions, keep searching for those deeper truths that connect us all.
Well, thank you so much for guiding us through this deep dive. It's been eye-opening, to say the least.
It's been a pleasure. Always happy to share these ideas with anyone who's curious.
And to all of you out there, keep those minds open, keep learning, and keep connecting with this amazing universe we live in. Until next time, happy diving.